Hey guys, welcome back to Room Schoolhouse. Today we are talking about the first black family to create automobiles in America. This is the Patterson family, specifically Charles Richard Patterson, the father who leads Patterson & Sons Automobiles. Really unique, rare automobile. Actually, there's not even one known to still exist today, which means if it's found, if your family owns one, you could be like the wealthiest people, maybe not like wealthier than Elon Musk, but at least like you're gonna be very wealthy if you have one of these vehicles. This is somebody that when you walk through the story, we've talked about on many of these different stories we've highlighted, when you're going from rags to riches or from a scenario that you're starting with nothing and then you are competing on one of the highest levels in the market against some of the major players like Ford or whoever else is coming out with some of their manufacturing assembly line strategies that are making it very difficult for a small mom and pop. Nonetheless, let's unfold this story. And if you back up to Charles Patterson, he was born in slavery in Virginia. He's born before the Civil War, in the midst of kind of the abolition movement back in the 1830s. And as a young man, he's got a very large family, lots of brothers and sisters. But leading up to before the Civil War, he recognizes, I'm going to get away. So he escapes from the plantation where he is. He goes through the Allegheny Mountains. He goes, and he's in Virginia, goes through West Virginia, arrives in Ohio, an anti-slavery state, and finally finds freedom once he arrives in Ohio.
Right. I was actually pretty confused why we chose him as a hero, because nobody cares about cars or football, and that's a major theme in this guy's life.
Yeah. So football, heads up. Kind of interesting side note coming with football with a son, not to be confused with another major abolitionist leader, but don't be confused. We'll get there in just a second. So yeah, right. let's back up to this guy, cars, football coming up soon. Nonetheless, now he's in anti-slavery Ohio.
Right. So he has 5 children, and the oldest son he named Frederick Douglass, which may be confusing. It's not the Frederick Douglass, however, it is the Frederick Douglass.
Named after, right, famous abolitionist at that time, Frederick Douglass, because this is the era when this is happening. Frederick Douglass already has a major name. At this point, we're talking the end of the Civil War. And so his son, Frederick Douglass, is born. Right. Becomes kind of important going forward.
So before we talk about the chapter of his son going to the Ohio State University, we have to talk about how he ended up joining a blacksmithing company, learning a lot of those trades, and started making stagecoaches. And he became very, very good at it. Eventually, he went into a business and was able to garner all the funds needed to send his son to go receive a higher education. So he went to apply at the Ohio State University.
Now, let's before even there, not to say any of this is incorrect, but it's also worth noting, as many of the leaders we've highlighted, as he's also making stagecoaches, he's also doing something else on a spiritual front.
Absolutely. So he was also a Sunday school teacher as well. And so you can see a very clear train with a lot of the people that we've talked about throughout these series, is that God is their guiding light, that he directs their paths, and in everything that they do, they render honor to whom honors due, which is Jesus Christ.
So didn't mean to slow the roll. Let's now go back to the Ohio State University. Frederick Douglass gonna apply.
Charles's son, Frederick Douglass, is then going to apply to the Ohio State University and is immediately denied on his application for, if it's any news to anyone, on account of his race. And so his father and a fellow preacher in the community decided that that's not going to stand, and they immediately sued, saying that you cannot bar someone from a higher education just because of the color of their skin. Eventually went to court, and they were successful. So he was able to join. He was the first black American to graduate from the Ohio State University and serve on the Ohio State University football team.
Now, saying serve, I think you mean play, but you're just showing your athletic prowess by saying he served on he played football at the Ohio State University. Yeah. But it's worth noting, right? If we're looking at Ohio was generally an anti-slavery state. Absolutely. But just like we've talked about in general, there's people in every state that don't always meet the position of the state when it comes to pro-slavery, anti-slavery, because in the South, there were some anti-slavery people in the South. In the North, there were pro-slavery people in the North. And especially if you're talking about academic institutions, this is also the era when Darwin's around, right? And Darwin is making his argument that there are superior races. And so if you're an academic and you're like, well, we're just following the science, it's Darwin. This is something that unfortunately did happen in some of these scenarios. It's great that his dad gets involved, the preacher gets involved, they win the lawsuit. And then his son, Frederick Douglass, first black man to attend the Ohio State University, the first one to play football at the Ohio State University. So it's kind of already a cool legacy. There's kind of already a cool story. Right. And we haven't even really gotten into the heart of the story yet.
So going back to Charles Patterson, he employed many workers when he was developing these cutting-edge horse-drawn carriages that just exemplified taste, exquisite ability. He actually employed whites and blacks. And in 1902, he actually created some innovations or inventions. Some of those were the furniture caster, for which my back thanks him. And the second was the dashboard. So he created several others, but those were really important to me personally. So like I said, all of his buggies were very exquisite, but he not only made them for business professionals, but he made it for the ordinary man as well. So that was something that was really important to him. And then later, Charles died in 1910, and his son, Frederick Douglass, the football player from The Ohio State University, took over his business.
And when Frederick takes over, he recognizes that there is a shift already happening, that the automobile, right, the horseless carriage is now around. And he sees that this is probably the way the market, right? This is the way the world's going to go at this point, and we probably need to get involved in this. But just like his dad had done, making sure anything they did was going to be the highest level quality there was. You know, this is like the limousine of carriages, whether it's just for the average mom and dad or the luxury business kind of carriage. He wanted to keep the same kind of quality, so he says, we're going to start making automobiles. And they identified at that point, there was like one automobile for every 65,000 people when automobiles were first coming into existence. At the point where his dad passed away, there was one vehicle for every 800 people. So they see the trend going, automobiles are growing, increasing. So they're going to do the Patterson automobile. So Frederick Douglass is the one who takes over, and it's so weird saying Frederick Douglass because all I think of is the abolitionist. No, this is Patterson. Frederick Douglass Patterson is going to do this automobile, and in 1915 they come out with the Patterson automobile, and the idea behind it was they wanted to have some of the highest quality, but they wanted to make it affordable as well, and it was pretty successful when it initially comes out.
Right. It was second to none from no other automobile. He was saying that there was nothing shoddy about it. There was nothing stingy. Everything was made to an exquisite taste, and that was something that just continued his father's legacy, and of course at a reasonable price. So unfortunately, then Ford came along, and we know about what Ford did to the rest of the automobile industry.
Henry Ford then came along and ended up revolutionizing how car manufacturing would come about, and was able to create something and invent something called the production line. And it made it even more affordable than the Patterson company could when it came to producing vehicles. And even though a lot of people acknowledged at the time that they weren't nearly as high quality, Ford's vehicles weren't nearly as high quality as Patterson's, because of the production line capability, it drove down the costs so much with economies of scale that many more people were able to participate in Ford's vehicles than Patterson's.
So keeping in his father's legacy, he then Frederick Douglass adapted to the changing market. And so he realized, hey, Ford's got the car area of the market covered. So what else can we do? So they started creating trucks and buses. And then they adapted further and had other companies create the combustion engine. So they would just work on the body, so making that luxury vehicle. However, then the decade-long depression came. So that's what took them out.
And the Great Depression, right, in fairness, this is something that so many businesses were devastated in the Great Depression. It will be interesting in a decade or two when people look back on even something like COVID. And when you look at the government shutdowns over COVID, even though we're talking 1 or 2 years, how many small businesses were devastated and businesses were closed that might not ever be open again. Well, imagine a shutdown like that went on for 10 years. And this wasn't necessarily a government shutdown. with the government forcing you to close your business, but when you look at what happened financially, how the market was devastated, people didn't have disposable income, they weren't able to buy things. There were so many challenges, so many businesses closed, and this is where we mentioned at the very beginning, the Patterson automobile, there's no evidence that one even still exists today, but collectors recognize if somebody found a Patterson automobile, this would be one of the valuest automobiles.
Contact WallBuilders.com.
If you'd like to make a donation of your Patterson automobile, we will gladly accept that. This is something that is an incredible legacy. And when you look back on people that made contributions in American history, when you look back on people that had great innovations, that were forefront of the market, and also when you're talking about competitive, when you're talking about leading in an industry, the first black family to create automobiles, there's a lot of legacy from the Pattersons. And then we could even go back to not the least of which is that they're helping the laws of Ohio change, right? When you're talking about the son, Frederick Douglass Patterson, being the first black man to attend the Ohio State University, the first one on the football team, so many great things about the Patterson legacy. And as we are going through the month of February, just highlighting some of these heroes, there's a lot of people that we're just acknowledging as being significant to the era and what they did at that time, that had it not been for these individuals who were leaders of the time, who were heroes of the time, the culture and landscape might have looked very different, and these were people that played significant roles along the way. Certainly, there are hundreds of other heroes we can highlight, and actually probably next February, we'll do the same thing again. We'll dive into a lot of these heroes that aren't very well known today, but their contributions are very evident. It's easy to identify them, and historically, it's not hard to find out more about them. And one of the easy ways is to go to WallBuilders.com to find out more about the Patterson family. And as always, if you want to know more of some of these great American heroes, just tune into the next episode of One Room Schoolhouse.